We'll do it live. Okay.
No. We'll do it live!
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live! And thing sucks!
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome, guys. There's a big shift on the Gifford Fire yesterday. Big shift. This is a very interesting day. And, I always get frustrated with the way that fire information is communicated on a variety of levels. I don't like the way fire information comes out from the agencies themselves. As you'll notice, what they always do is they'll tell you the acreage, the amount of personnel on the fire, and the containment. And we're going to talk a little bit today about why none of that matters at all. None of it matters. And yet that's what they focus on giving you. They don't give you an understanding of tactics. They don't give you an understanding of what to expect. I think a part of that is they have such a tight you-know-what about any kind of accountability or liability. They don't want to give you any sense of like, hey, we're going to try to hold it on this ridge, or this is where we think it's going to go, because then if it doesn't do that, or if it's, they feel like they're on the hook for some like misleading you or something. That's not helpful. I always try to provide as much context as I can, because I've always witnessed gulf in between what the reality is on the fire, what the firefighters understand. The reason I have any sense of what's happening is because I spent 6 years training with these guys, and I was filming them on the fire line for 6 years for my documentary Hotshot. And that clip that we showed at the front end of this live stream, that was from a scene in our movie, which is the #1 firefighter film of all time, thanks to you. We show that chain dragging because we wanted to demonstrate just how easy it is to start a fire. And it just so happens that this is basically what started the Gifford Fire. A vehicle was throwing sparks into state property along the highway, along the state highway. And then a fire started on Gavin Newsom's property and then spread into the Los Padres forest. Now, it's a relatively complex jurisdictional basket, but this is true all over California. We went over that yesterday, where we talked about the different state responsibility areas, the federal responsibility areas. There was another fire yesterday called the Rosa Fire. For some reason, the blue-haired intern running Gavin Newsom's press office account didn't feel compelled to tweet about that fire. Does anybody know why that is? Who knows why that is? I'll see if you guys can answer that in the chat. Why is it that Gavin Newsom's not tweeting about the Rosa Fire? Now, the Rosa Fire is actually threatening structures in a very significant way, threatening an entire community down in Riverside. Whereas the Gifford Fire is primarily just burning in the wilderness, and it's threatening some infrastructure, but for the most part, it's kind of like, all right, just let it burn, whatever. Not that big of a deal. Now, the other thing that I really dislike about the way that fire information is communicated is through the mainstream press. And guys, what happened to the LA Times? What happened to these people? This used to be a respectable news organization. I don't subscribe to the LA Times because why would I? They're horrendous. Their wildfire reporting is atrocious. What's crazy to me is, and again, this speaks to why the reporting is so bad and why I can speak about this stuff pretty fluently. It's because I actually spent time on the fire line. I don't mean just touring the neighborhoods that are burning down. I did the hotshot training. I went deep in the cut and tried to be around hotshots in particular because they know so much about wildfire. I wanted to learn from them. Obviously, we're following them for the doc. What you learn when you actually speak to these guys and you get your ass up there, it's so different from what's communicated in the media. And what's communicated in the media is primarily just histrionic nonsense that doesn't serve the public in any way. And before we get into this and how bad the LA Times is, I want to give you a little cheat code for how to determine if a news organization is just an activist and they're lying to you. It's really simple. Anytime you see somebody summarize a fire area in square miles, they're an activist. They're trying to scare you. Every single area measurement that's communicated throughout the entire chain of wildfire is communicated in acres. That is the unit of measurement. Every size up, every IR flight, every PIO map, everything is communicated in acres because we know acres. They're so committed to acreage, they will even give you a size up down to like 1/8 of an acre. 1/8 of an acre. That's how committed they are to using acreage. But for some reason, the media will always convert it to square miles. Now, we know what acres are. Like when you shop for a home on Redfin, you're putting in a half an acre, 3 acres of property. An acre is roughly the size of a football field. So we know what an acre looks like. Who knows what a square mile looks like? Who's ever using square miles as a unit of area measurement? Now, we use miles as a unit of linear measurement, and this is the rub. Because nobody ever thinks about what a square mile looks like, but a mile is also a linear measurement. They know that in our brains, we are going to conflate that area measurement of square miles with linear miles. So they could take a 60,000 acre fire, and convert it to 100 square miles or whatever it is. Like a 60,000 acre fire is a big fire. But when you paint it like this and you say, oh, it's 100 square miles, they know that you're going to conflate that with like 100 linear miles. And it gives you this impression that the fire ran 100 miles. Like this thing ran from LA to San Francisco. There's no reason to ever convert it to square miles, ever. Because it's only ever being communicated to them in acres. If they're listening to the radio, they're only hearing acreage. If they're communicating with a PIO, it's only acreage. If they're looking at a map, it's only acreage. That's all we ever get, acreage. So why are they converting it? Because they want to scare you. Now, in that vein, here's the LA Times. California is on pace for its worst wildfire year in recent memory, and SoCal is mostly to blame. Who writes like this? These people have never been up in the cut with hotshots, ever. It's very obvious by the way they write. These people, probably from like St. Louis, they couldn't carry 60 pounds on their back if their life depended on it. And yet here they are on the paper of record reporting about wildfire in the most, volatile wildfire region in the country. It's very odd. Now, who writes like this? SoCal is mostly to blame. Why are we blaming SoCal? Why is there blame? Are they trying to imply, well, it's because of the fire acreage in Southern California? Why are we blaming SoCal? So stupid. Keep in mind, worst wildfire year in recent memory. I mean, dude, if we just factor in Palisades and Eaton, that's horrible. Just because the loss of life and the loss of structures is horrendous. So it's already horrendous. But we've had very muted fire years over the last few years, which is why I've been pushing so hard for people to do more prescribed fire. Again, all of this is just histrionic. More than halfway through the year, California is currently on pace to have more fires and burn significantly more acreage than it did last year. Who cares? It was a slow year. We had an outbreak of 3 big fires. Was it like the bridge fire, the airport fire, and there was one other fire. I can't remember the name of it. That was the line fire, San Bernardino. And those were kind of nasty, but that was sort of it. We've had a few muted years because we had a ton of rain. Again, this is why I've been pushing them to do more fuels reduction, because we're now seeing the reckoning, right? We're seeing all this excess growth, and this ties into the Gifford Fire. Now, here's the latest IR flight from the Gifford Fire. When you look at the updates, I do not think they're accurate because I think CAL FIRE still has this thing at 72,000 acres. According to their IR flight and the notes from this flight last night, it is 82,567 acres. That's a total of like 15,518 acres of growth in the last period, which is actually less than I was expecting. Now, we're going to talk about why acreage doesn't matter, because it doesn't. The Palisades fire was what, like 26,000 acres? So here we are on the Gifford Fire. All that's burning is plants. It's 82,000 acres, way bigger than the Palisades fire, but who cares, right? A small fire in the wrong place can do $100 billion of damage. It doesn't need to be that big, right? It's just about how close is it to the stuff that we don't want burning. Now, if all of this manzanita, and chaparral is burning in the middle of nowhere in the Los Padres forest, who cares? This is why acreage doesn't really matter. Now, it matters to a certain degree in terms of logistics, like we need X amount of resources to be able to cut this amount of chains per hour to wrap this thing, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Now, when you look at this map, these dashed lines show where you have the most intense fire activity. And dude, was it intense yesterday. Holy mackerel. Now, the little dots interior, that's more scattered heat. So that means it's already burned through. It's cooling off. The good thing about this area is it does cool off quite a bit. The night there was like moderate recovery. It wasn't great recovery, but it was moderate recovery overnight. But look at these dashed lines. This is moving up towards La Panza, where we had this view of the fire. And it was, remember how we talked about yesterday? We talked about the inversion layer. There was a small little start over there. See how that camera panned over to another start? It was inconsequential. But remember yesterday we were talking about the inversion layer tends to pop around 11. Now that's basically where you have the normal thermodynamics of your atmosphere are inverted, where you've got this layer sandwiching the whole fire area and kind of putting a lid over the smoke. Around 11 a.m., things heat up enough that inversion layer flips, it pops, and then ventilates the fire. And then that's when you start to get that massive fire activity. So when we watch here, what we can see is right around 11, the thing pops, starts to ventilate, and then all of a sudden, within a few hours, it's starting to nuke off. And this thing was cranking. That fire front was nasty. There was like 150-foot fire whirls coming off of that thing as it was pushing towards those power lines. Let me see if we can find that. You know what? Here's a still. Look at that. That thing was cranking yesterday. That fire front was absolutely cranking. But then something very interesting happened. They got a very advantageous wind shift where that thing was cranking towards the cameras. And then all of a sudden, look at that. See how it's leaning off towards the coast? Now it's out of alignment, both with slope and with wind. And I posted about this. This is a very favorable wind shift holding the Gifford Fire along this ridge, providing a potentially solid opportunity to go direct. Now, just quick overview, there's direct tactics, there's indirect tactics. In this image, you can see both. Direct is when you go right to the fire's edge. It's preferable. It's safer. As long as the flames aren't so big that you can't actually be in there. But you go direct to the fire's edge and basically snatch the food out of its mouth. You take the fuel away from the fire right there, and then it stops. That's what you ideally want to do. And then down here, you have an example of an indirect tactic where they cleared out all of this vegetation in anticipation of the fire reaching here, right? So it's indirect to the actual flaming front. Now, it requires that you're not dealing with this. You can't go direct on this. You could potentially go direct with aircraft, right? But they're not going to do anything with fire that nasty. There's not enough aircraft in the world to really knock that down. And so you kind of just have to let it pulse and do its thing. People were asking, why are we letting it burn? Well, it's because they've already established how much line they can construct and how long it's going to take for this fire front to get there. And it's a relatively simple calculation. They have tables for all this. Like in this kind of territory, it's going to take a hand crew 10 hours to cut the amount of line that we need to stop this thing at this ridge. This thing's going to get here within 5 hours. Therefore, this ridge is a no-go. Okay, so they've already bumped it back. They calculate all this stuff in advance, and they are studs. Now, 15,000 acres of growth is less than I was expecting. Why is that? Well, because the feds are studs. Contrary to what Gavin Newsom has said when he shits all over the feds, these guys are legitimately the best in the business. They have done so much good work on this fire. I'm actually blown away. And I might be on the verge of admitting that I was wrong. I said yesterday that this could easily double in size. I'm no longer convinced that it may double in size. It might, but I'm not confident anymore. It might cross 100,000 acres, but it might not, because they've been doing such a good job on this fire. Now, where they've been getting containment is obviously right up against the Madre Fire scar, okay? Because it can't burn any farther. It can't burn any farther. Now, the thing is, they added this containment just now, this huge chunk right here. This is adding to their 7% containment. It was dead out there. Like, there's nothing to burn on that side. It was already dead out when it first collided with it, I think 2 days ago. So why are they only calling it contained now? This is an important thing to understand about containment, guys. Containment doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means, okay? Colloquially, a contained piece is like something that they would feel comfortable walking away from and not supervising it. They think it's going to stop there, it's not going to jump, and we feel comfortable walking away. But technically, what they need to see is they need to see a physical barrier blocking that fire from advancing, right? A separation of the fuels, and it needs to be cold, right? Something that may not have happened on the Palisades fire. They need to validate that there's no heat signature coming off of that would be significant enough to flare up and then burn again. So there's oftentimes a delay. There's oftentimes a delay between the reality on the ground and when that fire is like stopped versus when they actually call it contained. And depending on the fuels, if you're in timber, sometimes that can be 3 or 4 days where the firefighters have already gone, hey, this is good, we're out of here. But in terms of like the legal concept of containment, they're not going to announce it for several days. So you guys need to realize that as you're reading the terrible information out of the LA Times, for example, containment doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means. And you could be sitting at 0 containment for the first few days of the fire because, again, doesn't mean that they're not making progress. They might have already made a ton of progress, but they can't call it contained for a couple of days. Okay, so acreage and containment, they don't necessarily mean what you think it means. Now, they've had a lot of success, obviously, up against this burn scar because the burn scar is doing all the work. But as we saw, when we had this wind shift last night, all of a sudden, you had this opportunity to go direct here. And I wasn't sure if they would necessarily want to for a couple of reasons. A, it might be a little too volatile. They are getting some overnight winds that can pose a bit of a challenge. You're putting guys in this ocean of fuel. It's a little risky. But the other thing is they may not want to draw some arbitrary line in the middle of nowhere. We've talked about how fire is necessary for the landscape, and it might be a good idea to go a little bit bigger box and let more of this burn so that way it's not a threat. Now, looking back at this map, where you see the Madre Fire scar on the right, and now you have the Gifford Fire bumping right up against this line. Now, we're very happy for the Madre Fire right now because it's stopping the fire. It's stopping it cold in its tracks right there. It can't go any farther to the east. But think about this line here on the Madre Fire. This was hard fought, right? This cost a ton of money to put this line in here. It cost them so much money and effort, and they risked their lives to make sure that the stuff interior to that, the stuff west to that, didn't burn. And now it's all burned anyway. This speaks to the sort of futility of the firefight in a lot of ways, right? We put so much effort into trying to make sure that this doesn't burn. And then what we find is a month later, 2 months later, or a year later, everything on the other side of that line just burns anyway. It burns anyway. So we need to reevaluate like why we are stopping fires where we do, and if maybe we should let more stuff burn. And so that's why I was kind of questioning, are they going to go direct? Well, we have an answer. Let's see if you guys can determine what's happening here. It goes by relatively quickly, but maybe you can tell what's happening. You see those lights? Did you guys see what happened there? I'm going to see if I can take it back. Look at that. What is that? It's weird. It looks like a rooster tail of fire is just walking its way down the landscape. So here you have the actual fire burning, right, in the drainage below. But now you have this, watch this rooster tail. Look at that. What's that fire just walking its way down that line? Well, what it is you've got firefighters firing that off. That is a firing operation. So they did go direct. They went direct. And you can see here, see if I can freeze it. You can see the dozers. So clearly they pushed along that ridge line where you had this favorable wind shift. And now all of a sudden it's out of alignment. So they pushed along this ridge line, and then they walked fire down from that ridge line to burn off all of the fuels in between the fire and their dozer line, which is very effective. So what they're doing is they're leveraging the physics of how fires tend to stall out on a ridge line. And then also you have favorable winds pushing it out of alignment, and they're going direct and then burning off everything in between. This is going to be a very, very solid piece. And what they did was they, if you look at Division Hotel, which is where we were just looking, that fire got right under these high tension transmission lines. So this is very, very valuable work that these guys are doing up there. I'm curious, who's on Division Hotel? You have Crane Valley. Great. That's a great hotshot crew. Again, federal resources. You have Salmon River hotshots. You've got Stockton. You've got Vandenberg, the local boys. They're a type 2 crew now, I think, but they're studs. So you've got a lot of great resources doing great work. So again, no matter what Gavin Newsom tells you, the feds are studs. They're studs. They're so good at this. They're so good at this, and they're doing such great work on this fire. And they've made so much more progress than I expected. When I said the fire may double, it was at like 60,000. So I was, basically saying I think it's going to get to 120. I'm not so sure that it's going to. This was yesterday's map. Here's today's map. So you can see the growth, right? Where it's really pushing is, you see that southeastern corner? That's where it's really pushing. And let's see if we can take a look at that. One of the challenges that they're dealing with is it's very steep terrain. It's tough. It's very tough. Let's look at this. Here we go. This is what they're dealing with there. It's very, very steep. This is gnarly, like tons of drainages, tons of areas where fire can get very well established. And so that's why it's kind of running through there with more alacrity than other areas. Up to the north in Division Hotel, where we're just looking at, as it progresses farther north, it's actually getting into areas that are more favorable for dozers, as we saw. So they can get resources in there and they can do a lot of damage. But down here, it's steeper. There's a lot of timber stringers through here. So you have much denser fuels. So this is going to be a problem area. But generally speaking, what they've done a good job of is they've been leveraging the fire history, which is pretty robust, through this area. And they've managed to do a good job of sealing up parts of this southern end. So looking at the growth again, moderate growth to the south, more significant growth to the southeast. So that's going to continue to be a problem. But they're making a lot more progress on this fire than I expected, which is outstanding. Again, Gavin Newsom's blue-haired intern felt it was necessary to tweet about the Gifford Fire, which began on federally managed land, which is a lie. It did not start on federally managed land. It burned into federally managed land. And those studs are currently doing an outstanding job of beginning to get the upper hand on this fire. Now, as far as weather is concerned, I'm not going to use Rich Thompson's incident forecast because he got mad at me for using it, even though I paid for it because I'm a federal taxpayer. I love you, Rich. Rich is great. He's truly a stud. Can't tell you how many of his forecasts I read when I was chasing these fires. So yeah, anyway, that's the Gifford Fire. They're making really good progress. They're doing a great job on it. Like I said, there's certain areas where they kind of have to let the fire come to them. So it's kind of going to look like they're not doing anything until they are. And sometimes it's subtle. Like you just saw that little rooster tail of fire. That's dudes with drip torches just walking down a dozer line and burning it, using fire to fight fire. It's outstanding. It's the best way to do it. Now, is there anything else that we have to cover with this? We have my outstanding tweets on it. Just outstanding. My tweets are incredible. Let's talk about the Rosa Fire. The Rosa Fire, which for some reason, Gavin Newsom has decided it's not worth tweeting about. Why? Dude, it's threatening a community. Look at all these evacuations. There's a bunch of homes right here. There are a bunch of homes right here. You've got Pinyon Pines, Ribbonwood. Why are we not tweeting about this? Oh, interesting. That's why. This is the agency having jurisdiction. It's CAL FIRE. So it's a catastrophe and it's negligence if it's the U.S. Forest Service dealing with the fire. But when it's Cal Fire, it's just a wildfire, man. It's just climate change. That's what it is. This thing was ripping too. Look at this crap. Look at this crap from Brandy. Look at Todd. What a stud. He's just standing there filming it like it's nothing. I love Todd. Time to boogie. You can see all those firebrands starting to land around his truck. Dude, it's a little bit of bad luck. One of those things starts setting your tire on fire. It's no good. But look at that. Dude, this thing was cranking. This right here, what we're looking at is we're looking at a reckoning with a few years of very moderate fire activity and tons of rain, right? So that panicky article that we saw with the LA Times, which is so dumb, where they're talking about how this might be the biggest fire season in memory. Well, yeah, because we've had slow fire seasons. The result of that is we've got tons of fuels. Look at this video from Todd. 564 fire photo. You have to be following him. He does great live streams. He's a former firefighter. This dude knows what he's doing. But this thing got in alignment with the winds. Look at all these decadent fuels growing right up against the roadway. And look at that cop just gunning it to get out of there. This thing is absolutely cranking. This is cranking. And the governor's not tweeting about it, even though it's threatening the community. I don't know why. Very interesting how that works. But yeah, we're going to see more of this. In 2020, what we had, he's pointing out a spot fire right there. What we had in 2020 is in 2019, you had a very heavy rain year and a very light fire season. It was one of the lightest fire seasons on record. And then in 2020, it was actually off to a relatively muted start. And it wasn't until August that all of a sudden things started really popping. We had the lake fire, and then it seemed like that kind of triggered this whole catastrophe. And then sure enough, we had that lightning bust in mid-August where the entire state caught fire. And then we had 4 million acres of fire. It feels similar, right? So we've had a couple years of very significant rain and muted fire seasons. So just by default, yeah, this fire year is going to seem pretty bad. We had serious drought in Southern California in particular, going through to January. And it never really abated. Like, we didn't get enough rain in between the Palisades and Eden fires to substantially improve the conditions. And of course, more rain equals more fuels, right? More rain equals more fuels. You guys not seeing this? What is going on? I'm trying to look at this live feed and see if it's coming through properly. Odd. I don't know if this is coming through. Escape full screen. Okay, there we go. All right. Sorry, guys. But yeah, we've got several fire seasons that were very muted because of the rains. We've got a ton of fuel because of the rains. And so the conditions seem to be in alignment now where we're going to have a very, very nasty fire season. And it is a season. Just like how I told you, when people say that when they define the fire area in square miles, they're lying to you because no one's communicating. Nobody's communicating it in square miles. It's always acres. They're doing that because they want you to conflate it with linear miles and then imagine a fire front that's 100 miles long when it's really only like 5 miles long. They always do this. Similarly, people who say that we have a fire year and there is no fire season, it's not true. You notice how the fires are suddenly picking up? Yeah, because it's seasonal. It's seasonal. You can't say that climate is responsible for the fires and then act as though the shift in climate throughout the seasons doesn't impact the fires. Yes, we had an anomalous fire outbreak in January. That happened in 2017 with the Thomas Fire, where we had an anomalous fire outbreak in December. Because, of course, wildfire is not necessarily a hot weather phenomenon. It is a dry weather phenomenon. And those conditions don't necessarily get alleviated when it's cold in the wintertime. You need season-ending rains. They typically come in November, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. We've had a few years where we had abnormally short fire seasons with very little fire activity, relatively speaking, for California. We forget about that. We only focus on when it's bad. Well, it's getting kind of bad now. Let's look at where are we for the year? 228,000 acres burned. It's a fair amount. It's a fair amount. It's not crazy. The fatality numbers are crazy. This is crazy. And that's, of course, because of those 2 January fires. Like the total structures destroyed. These are horrific numbers. This is usually like end of the fire season, 2018 kind of numbers. But the acres burned is substantially lower than what should be relative to this. And again, just touches on that point that I made earlier. Doesn't really matter the acreage. It matters where. It's just like real estate. Location, location, location. Let's see the incidents by year. So let's just do some comparisons here. 2019, that's that slow year we're talking about, 277,000 acres total. That's where we're at. We're almost there now. We're gonna be passing 2019's entire fire season within the next week, probably, right? And then 2020 exploded, 4 million. What did we have the last 2 years? 2024, million acres. Solid year. It's a solid year. 2023, very small year, 332,000 acres. What about 2022? It's like what, the exact same number? 331, 332. So you had back-to-back years in 2022 and 2023 of very, very muted fire seasons. That is extremely rare. And of course, I felt like I was the only person on Twitter talking about this. I feel like I'm the only like anti-panic person reporting on this stuff, where I actually point out when things are slow. And dude, I released a wildfire movie this year. There were no fire headlines that year. So nobody cared about the movie. And I was still talking about how, yeah, dude, it's a very slow fire season. Why? Because I can't help but be honest about this stuff. The LA Times, on the other hand, they do not care about being honest. What they won't tell you is, yes, this is on pace to be its worst wildfire year in recent memory, because in the recent memory, we had very small fire years. Very, very small. 332,000 acres for California is microscopic. The natural burn rate is 4 to 11 million acres per year. Okay. Last year we had 1 million acres. That's good. That's good. But compared to other years, 1.5 in 2017, 2018 was pretty bad. 1.9, so basically 2 million acres. 2019, 2021 was pretty bad, but 2019, 2022, and 2023 were small. This is a very, very small number. So of course, this is going to look bad because we're going to pass this entire fire season in the next few weeks. Okay, it is what it is. Do you guys have any questions? Right now, it looks like things are going pretty well for the Gifford Fire. They're going direct. They've punched in a bunch of dozer line. They fired off this ridge here. Let me see if I can get you guys this view. Bang, here's what we're looking at. So they punched in a bunch of dozer line, and they've got dozers pushing more line. You can see them. Oh man, why'd you do that? Look at all these dozers. They're going to work. So that answers our question. They are going direct. They are going to punch up through here. They already fired off this area. And you can see how cold it already looks. This is good country to hang up this fire. This is going to be a more challenging area, but it's doable. It's totally doable, especially if they start getting some copters in here and then get some crews to cut this out. Some of these tougher areas cut out with hand crews. They're going to smash this, and they'll be able to seal up this northern flank pretty well. So things are looking pretty good. I think it could still get over 100,000 acres, especially in the southeast. The Rosa Fire, I think they're going to do some good work on that. Cal Fire are studs, right? I'm not a hater. I don't think Cal Fire is bad. I'm not like Gavin. I think Cal Fire is outstanding. I get a lot of people giving me crap, but I think they're great. They're a great agency, and they have poached so many studs from the U.S. Forest Service because the feds were not paying their guys enough. And of course, in 2021, they had that stupid injection mandate, and then they lost 40% of their workforce. A lot of them lateraled over to Cal Fire, and they're getting paid a lot better. They're getting treated a lot better. They have an agency that does really, really good PR for them, which, you know, they get crap for, but it's good. It makes you feel good about your work. Like, I would want to go on Ellen, you know? The Cal Fire guys get to go on Ellen because they have Navy pants. Meanwhile, the feds, they're kind of just up here in the middle of nowhere, and we only see them on a fire cam because they don't have Navy pants. So I think CAL FIRE is great. I think they do great work. And I think the feds are great. See how that works, guys? I could be the head of state where I don't crap all over the resources. Oh, and by the way, if you guys aren't subscribed to the Hotshot Wake Up, you should be. And listen to the last podcast where he interviewed Chief Bobby Garcia. Chief Bobby Garcia. He is the fire chief on the Angeles National Forest, Chief 1. He is a career hotshot. And if you guys have been following my feed, even for a little while, you've seen how I've been advocating for him in a leadership role in the new federal wildfire agency that's going to be stood up next year. He is the best fire chief in the country. And he is sort of a quiet warrior. He just does the work. He doesn't do any PR. This is the first time I've actually seen him in an interview or heard him in an interview. And there are a few things that really stood out to me. One of the, and just so you know, when I was filming on the ANF for 6 years, but I never said more than 5 words to the guy, right? I kind of deliberately kept my distance from overhead because I was kind of just doing my own thing. And I didn't want anybody telling me, hey, you shouldn't be in there. So I don't really know him that well. But what I observed is all of his firefighters love him. They really admire him. He was an operator for so many years. He really understands the reality on the ground. But when I did hear him speak, I always heard him speak so eloquently about public service. And you can tell by the way he talks about it that he really means it. And so it's not surprising in this podcast on the Hotshot Wake Up, he was talking very eloquently about public service and really selling the job of becoming a hotshot. It's a really, really cool job. And they are finally getting the pay boosted. They're getting some good pay now. But the way that he talks about public service, it's just such a stark contrast to Gavin Newsom and the way that he's trying to score these petty political points against someone like Chief Garcia, who spent his entire life in service of this country, trying to protect its most precious natural resources. The guy has fought fire in this exact area a bunch of times. He's been on a bunch of fires in this area, nearly got killed, and he still serves his country. And the thing is, he doesn't talk shit about CAL FIRE. And when you listen to this podcast, towards the end, Tim asked him, he opened it up. He's like, hey, is there anything else you want to talk about? Now, Chief Garcia has a lot to brag about. He is the first dude to make all of his firefighters permanent. So while the feds, just so you know, anyone who's seen my movie, this is redundant, they call their firefighters in the feds, they call them forestry technicians. It's this stupid bureaucratic loophole where they get to have them do the work of firefighters without paying them or treating them like firefighters. He was the first one to convert his seasonal firefighting workforce to permanent full-time employees. This was a very big deal. That may seem like sort of bureaucratic gobbledygook, but this is a very big deal for just honoring your workforce and also for retaining these studs where our tax dollars are invested in training these guys up, right? We're spending a ton of money on people like Rich Thompson to do their work. We want to preserve that investment. And Bobby Garcia did that. The Angeles is also the first forest to do a night flying helicopter program. He's the only forest to have 5 hotshot crews, which is very difficult to do. He's got a ton that he can brag about on the ANF. He has an outstanding safety record on the ANF. And the thing is, he has the most scrutiny. He's operating in Hollywood. This is the media capital of the world. So when a fire like the Bobcat fire is threatening the Mount Wilson Observatory and threatening to burn up billions of dollars of infrastructure, and it's up to him and Oscar Vargas and Dunphy back when he was still working, and all the hotshot crews to burn around Mount Wilson, to set fire to the land around this billion-dollar infrastructure in the hopes of stopping that bigger fire down below it. He's got every single media organization breathing down his neck, hoping that he will fail and it will burn up on camera. And he nailed it. The ANF has so much like super expensive real estate around it. It is the most difficult, hazardous, and dynamic forest in the country. I know people are sick of hearing about the ANF, but it's just true, right? They have the smallest margin for error on this forest. They cannot fuck up because between an ignition in the wildlands and structures here on the LPF, dude, you've got 80,000 acres of nothing. But on the ANF, you get an ignition, it's burning up $20 million homes within 30 minutes. It is a very, very tight margin for error. And he he coordinates with like 7 other agencies in mutual aid zones on every fire, and they do it seamlessly. So Bobby Garcia has so much to brag about. But when Tim asked him, hey, anything else you want to talk about? He didn't brag about any of that stuff. He didn't talk about the night flying helicopter program. He didn't talk about any of this stuff. What did he talk about? He thanked all of the people, all of the resources who came from out of state and out of region to California in January to help him fight the Eaton fire. Compare that with Governor Newsom, who shits all over the feds whenever he can. Bobby Garcia, when he could shine the spotlight on himself, and he deserves it because he is, even though he will never say this, he is the best fire chief in the country. And he does an outstanding job. When he is given a platform, he thanks the resources who our taxpayer dollars already pay for. They should be expected to come and help, but he is still thanking them. That grace and that gratitude that he shows and the selflessness, to me, is indicative of someone who's actually been in service of his community. That is a hallmark of just about every firefighter I've ever seen. This is why I stress the importance of putting an operator in charge of our agencies. We don't want soil scientists. We had a soil scientist in charge of the U.S. Forest Service for the last few years. It was a fucking nightmare. He banned prescribed fire nationwide. And we had some of the most devastating fires that we've ever seen. The guy was an absolute fuck up, and he promptly led to the resignation of like 40% of the firefighting workforce. So we got to stop having these bureaucrats in charge. We need someone like Chief Bobby Garcia in charge of the new Fed Fire Agency next year. So if any of you guys have any open lines of communication with politicians, I would highly recommend that you make sure they know the name Bobby Garcia. Chief Robert Garcia is outstanding. It was a great interview. Again, that was on the Hot Shot Wake Up. Make sure you listen to that episode, listen to that interview. It'll give you some insight into a guy. Again, he's just a silent warrior, so you probably never heard anything from him, but I have. And I was always impressed with how much the firefighters on the ANF really, really love and value that guy. He takes care of his people, and he's just super dialed. I couldn't say enough nice things about the guy. So go listen to that podcast, the Hot Shot Wake Up. Subscribe to that podcast, subscribe to the Substack. It's definitely worth it. There's a lot of good conversations happening and a lot of good insight into what to expect with these fires, which I hopefully provided you today. So in the absence of any questions or comments, I'm going to bounce. I'm going to go hang out with my wife. All right, guys. Thanks for joining me. We'll pop back on here if there's any interesting developments, but I think the studs in the U.S. Forest Service on federally managed land are cleaning up Gavin Newsom's mess quite well. Oh yeah, Phil Hardy, you need to be pushing Bobby Garcia to the feds. I may have someone else in somebody's ear as well. But again, I don't know Chief Garcia. Like I said maybe like 5 words to him my entire time filming on his forest around his guys. Never said more than 5 words. And it was like, hey, what's up, guy? That was it. So like, I don't know him. I don't have a personal connection to him. I've observed how much his firefighters love him and how well run the Angelus is. And I know we need that kind of leadership. He really understands. He's super plugged into all of the new technological advancements. And he is the most advanced. He's running the most advanced forest in the country with the tightest margin for error, the most scrutiny, and he does it almost flawlessly. So, one of the things that I wanted to do with my film Hot Shot was shine a light on the people who are genuinely heroic people in the feds, the hot shots and the other wildland firefighters who are called forestry technicians, as well as the chiefs who do such great work, and they do it out in the middle of nowhere, and they get no recognition because they have green pants. And they drive green trucks. They don't have navy pants, and they don't have red trucks. And so they don't get any attention. But they deserve it because they do outstanding work. And I'm so sick of Gavin Newsom shitting all over them just because he's running for president. Such an asshole. The contrast between someone like him and someone like Chief Garcia, it's just, you can see who's actually served. I'll just leave it at that. All right, guys. This was my service for the day. It's a joke. Until next time, we'll do it live.